Hello, everybody. Welcome to another podcast for the AI Applied Consortium. We have an amazing guest that is joining us today. His name is Sam Hamilton. He is the member of the Board of Trustees of the AI Applied Consortium and formerly the Senior Vice President of Visa, and myself, Konrad Konarski, who is the Chairperson of the AI Applied Consortium. I want to welcome you today. We're going to be talking about all things agentic, trying to focus on ways in which we can share our expertise, our domain knowledge, our historical experience with projects, to be able to help guide you along the journey of agentic AI. And hopefully coming out of this session, you'll be wiser and you'll also be looking to extend questions to us because we only have a limited time to share a lot of information. So Sam, thank you for joining me. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself a little more in the context of your experience and of course in the context of agentic AI. And then we have a pretty big agenda we're going to try to sort through in a 45-minute time frame here.
I have had the opportunity to work on data and AI capabilities for various organizations the past 3 decades. Now I'm focusing on advising enterprises with their AI transformation and data transformation, and also advising the startups and investment community focusing on AI investment. And most importantly, I am part of the Applied AI Consortium, working along with Konrad and rest of the trustees to help the community and help the various industries as they are embarking on a journey to do the AI transformation.
Thank you, Sam. So like I said, we have a pretty expansive agenda here, and we want to cover as many lenses as possible around how to succeed with agentic. And I want to lead with, I think, an important one, because for those of you that have already taken the dive with agentic, there are critical things that we need to be looking at. And part of the issue is that we are, in many cases, leaders are underestimating either positively or negatively the impact of this technology, the speed in which it is moving, the capabilities that it provides, but also similarly on the flip side, it's still in some workflows a work in progress. Like we've talked about before, the capabilities of agentic are doubling almost every 6 months, but the reality is that the industry and users, adopters are not really honing in on that and on the necessary steps to make it successful. So Sam, with that in mind, what are leaders underestimating specifically on their journey with agentic AI?
Yeah, that's a great question, Konrad. I think when I think about the agentic AI, there are 4 A's comes to my mind: artificial intelligence, automation, autonomous, and action. All 4 needs to be maximized to see the value of that. We as leaders underestimate in some of those areas, and underestimating the positive things is also negative. So let's look at some of the areas where we could underestimate that we can tune our thinking around that. Our first area I would go for is the employee productivity and efficiency. And agentic AIs could serve as an expert co-pilot, transforming enterprise and real world context into confident actions that will help every worker. Think of that as everyone on the team could be or could become the best performer of the team. And taking the knowledge and action from the best performer, we can democratize that and it can be used by every team member in the team. That increases the productivity and efficiency. And that is the first area that comes to my mind. The second area I think about that is the data. When it comes to a data, not only collecting the data and feeding the data to the model to perform it better, but also creating this flywheel effect of collecting more data, feeding the data back to the model, getting a better performance, better accuracy is really important. So the investment into the data is the second area of underestimation. The third area is the need for strategic alignment and reality check. All of us have seen the study published by MIT. 95% of the GenAI pilots are currently failing. There are main reasons for this that you can think of. The cause is not really the intelligence of the AI, but the main reasons that comes to my mind are brittle execution architecture. That means we don't have the architecture system ready for us to do the transformation. The second one is the lack of a learning loop. That means we are not collecting enough data, feeding them back to get the learning loop effect. The third, I would say, is the workflow misalignment. The agents are not integrated into the actual workflow process. And we do that as a POC, proof of concept, not necessarily connected with the workflow that is actually needed for our organization. The last, I would say, is the lack of user interaction alignment. When it comes to a user now, it's not just the human, but also for the agent. We should have the information and also alignment and the interaction that not only human can interact with, but also agents can do that for reasoning purposes. So that's the third area, which is the need for strategic alignment and reality check. The fourth one is the investment for security and safety. With the introduction of AI and democratization of AI across the industries, the surface area and the threat vector for is increased with this AI, which is a data security, agent security. And also along with that, we should be able to invest in the guardrails and gating. Agent must have built-in guardrails. For example, the customer service agent may process small claims autonomously, but requires human approval for the large transaction to start with. And the last one is the governance framework. We need to have a governance framework where human in the loop when necessary. I think of that as a decision framework popularized by Jeff Bezos, one-way door and two-way door decisions. And the two-way door decisions may probably human in the loops to start with. Those are the areas we need to pay attention to, both in terms of investment and the focus, so that we don't underestimate this transformation.
I couldn't agree more. I want to go back to the MIT report, because for those that have read it, probably they've unpacked really what it was about, and the details of which kind of clarify that statement that 95% of agentic projects fail. Those that have read the headlines might have missed these details. You've kind of articulated some of them, like the critical paths to success. One, it mentions that, in fact, a lot of these organizations fail because they don't partner with expert organizations, which is actually a part of one of my fundamental pillars of success for agentic, is the talent acquisition, or at least the upskilling of the existing talent, and how agentic specifically sits in a place that doesn't port directly from historical skills. Like a data scientist is very intelligent, can problem solve, but the fundamental skills of a data science expert or an IT expert don't translate directly into embeddings, into knowledge architectures, into enterprise applications used to build out agentic solutions. Like those are additional skill sets. So the fundamental piece that the report talks about is use an expert, use a partner. And the other three that you mentioned, the brittle architectures, which is kind of like force feeding or expecting that you can fit everything into the context window without building a reliable knowledge architecture. The continuous improvement, obviously, both from a user experience and from a kind of essential component, because you want to get to a place where ideally these agentic agents are in fully autonomous mode, performing everything accurately and precisely. The reality is that you're not going to start there, but you want to have a means to get there. So continuous improvement is critical, and the workflow alignment as well. I had an interesting discussion around this where we came upon that an agentic agent, you should treat them as an extension of your team. And so if you don't train them on your organization, give them an ability to improve and align with it, then similarly, like an agent, it will just base its knowledge on its own domain knowledge. So even if you hired someone, they don't know your organization, they're not going to get everything right. If you don't allow them to improve and train through continuous improvement, they're not going to get any better. So it's, I think, a strong analogy that I recently heard to kind of see agentic agents and the necessities that they have in an alike way to a digital equivalent to a human being that is essentially replacing a workflow.
That's a good analogy, by the way.
Yeah.
And I have heard a similar thing as well. Treat that as an intern, so you can teach them all the things that you have to start with.
Right.
And also, I want to go back to the expert help that you are talking about. It's really critical. And one of the things that I have seen with my experience as well, and also what I'm observing, Konrad, is that nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. And if we have any experts who have seen that It's be really helpful for us to do that. And also it allows us to leapfrog rather than doing the same thing and make a slow progress on. That's an important that we can. And also it's ready. We are ready to help in the areas where we could bring those kind of expertise in.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think we covered upon the initial top level, I would say, ways in which people are underestimating this technology, which fundamentally they're grounded in just knowing its capabilities and then knowing its pitfalls and how to solve those pitfalls. I want to speak a little bit more about like the paths to success at an enterprise scale, because people, I use that term, I generalize that term, not all people, but many individuals in organizations, and that report that you reference is a function of representing that notion, have struggled because they did not consider all the moving parts necessary for success. And at an enterprise level, I threw a couple of ideas that are relevant. One of them is knowledge architectures, which we'll cover a little later with embeddings and semantic foundations. The aspect of continuous improvement, leveraging the enterprise architecture that exists, I think is important, because ultimately you want to get to a place with agentic AI where you can build ecosystems of agents that can be repurposed, that could be used together to automate more and more complex workflows. You want to have an ability to improve the agents, not just through continuous improvement of the agent itself, but through the knowledge architectures that it uses. You want to centralize some of the knowledge that you'll be using to support the agent's use. So I wanted to get your input, because I've known you for at least a couple of years now, I think. And back in your time with Visa, I was amazed by the great things that you did there with agentic AI and semantic embeddings, and just the overall approach to allowing agentic AI to succeed at the enterprise. So maybe you can share a little bit of those best practices, given your expertise, with the audience here.
Sure, happy to do that, Konrad. I think I would start from the data readiness. I think successful AI transformation start from the successful implementation of data, the transformation people have gone through. All the organizations that I had the pleasure of working with and I had the front row seat to witness the transformation, what I have seen is the data readiness. We need to bring in a new lens when it comes to the data. How we can bring the data with the privacy, security, and governance in place, and also get that ready for the knowledge architecture. Now, the consumer of data is not going to be just human, not just the API. It's going to be the agents. It's going to be the knowledge systems that we need to share. So I would start with the strong implementation or strong focus that we need to have the data. Once we have that, the rest of the things will flow. That'll be a little bit more smooth with AI transformation. And few areas that caught my attention as I looked through that successful implementation. The first area would be automation of the back office. And these are the agents that you can deploy to make us efficient, make employees efficient, make the teams efficient, make the organization efficient. And you can visualize, we can have an intelligent briefing agent. How about an agent that looks at, let's listen to monitors our email, Slack, and reports and classify them based on the organizational priority. Here is the summarized top items that you need to focus on right from the beginning. When we come to the office, when we start or open our laptop, we can say, here are the 5 items you need to take care of that. So it'll be a lot easier. It's not only aggregation of things, but also against the policies, against the priorities that we have as an organization. That's going to be really helpful. How about you mentioned about agents being like an employee? How about an onboarding agent that train the new employees, where we can bring the employees in and give them not just the what we call that as onboarding materials or manuals for them, instead personalized instruction and help and education for the employees who are onboarding. I call it as an onboarding agent. And compliance agent, instead of just giving them the training. And of course, we need to give them the training as well and observe people's work and come back and say, here is a safety compliance that you need. Here is a regulatory compliance that you need to watch out for. If we can do that at the real time or in the context, that will be really helpful. It's more of this is automation in the back office. The other category that we can think of that is the agentic operation and commerce. How about we have agents for finance, sales, and support to help us through? And maybe a buying agent. Now, in a corporate setting, the agents can handle the research, initial negotiation, whether it's a software license, an office supply, or anything for that matter, and evaluate vendors against multiple company policies and prepares a decision for the procurement so that somebody can look at that very quickly and make the decision, which now with the evidence-based, if we can bring the reasoning why we are making the recommendation, what we have. That's an example. Or it could be a financial reconciliation agent that's not just looking at the reports and a messy receipt that we have. They can put them together, reconcile that, and making it ready for an approval. Those are the examples of an agentic operational commerce agent that we can bring them in. And if you could go from the operations to the strategic area, maybe a strategic research and marketing intelligence agent, which can help the strategy and legal team. It is going from, here is the competitive intelligence report that we are bringing in. Now we can check that against various sources. And it can crawl the whole market and to find out what are the different data available for us to pull them together. Or it's a contract intelligence agent that can look at the hundreds of pages of the contract document and come back and saying, here are the things that you need to look for, maybe the top risk items that we need to look at that. Those are the kind of things will help us in a big way. And the last thing that I would mention is more of bringing an AI native user interaction where we can make the decisioning and also recommendation with the facts and also support there. So this is where we can talk about how we can do a proactive notification, monitoring all the documents, all the data that we see, and also we can bring in an evidence-based recommendation instead of a generic answer. We can say, hey, here is what we recommend. The agent could say, here is what, Konrad, I'm recommending that you make the decision in this area. Here is the reason why. Here are the evidences that you have. That makes it to be easier for you. I think this is what I see that as an agentic AI in the enterprises. And I'm getting only few items for the time constraint, but the list goes on.
Right. Yeah. So let me go back to a few points.
Yeah.
Unrehearsed, because you mentioned on a couple of topics that were top of mind for me already. So you started the conversation. At some point, you mentioned kind of the back office use cases. I find these use cases interesting on two fronts. If you map use case value across the four quadrants of complexity and impact, they typically don't sit in the highest impact quadrant, but they are lower in complexity.
Yep.
And what's interesting about these back office use cases and agentic AI specifically, and just in general, not just using agentic AI to automate them, but using fundamental generative AI technologies to build them. Because these use cases, some of them have been sitting on the back burner, not because you couldn't implement an alternative technology solution to solve them, but because the cost point versus the return wasn't there. Yeah. So if you had a value case to solve one unproductive task that represents, $20,000 a year, the investment to get that solution in place likely superseded the ROI. So you let it sit on the back burner. Today, with the advent of code generation technology, you accelerate the development time cycle and the cost. And so now you can, fundamentally you can do two things. You can just develop using generative tools, but you can also make that development cycle faster in kind of two lights, right? One is using GenAI to build code. Second is using large language model agentic capabilities to abstract some of the technical details that you would have to have heuristically implemented in the code. So you're kind of supercharging your development in two different lenses, which I find fascinating. And it's not really typically looked at when you're prioritizing value, but now you have all these back office use cases that are sitting there ripe for solving using agentic AI. So I would encourage the audience to look at that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think we typically look at just the value at the top line. Is it worth it, ROI? And now with the Gen AI and AI, agentic AI, even the I, we should look at investment. Investment is so small, we may want to address that now. It's both on the R and I. You need to reevaluate. Very good.
Yeah. So the second thing you talked about, which I loved as well, because you kind of listed this to me like it's in effect a co-pilot, but not in the Microsoft exclusive term, that can guide and support employees across a spectrum of different things that they are needing, whether it be their own upskilling or augmentations of decisions, whether it be removing unproductive tasks from their queue. So there are patterns which we'll cover later that actually speak to this in general. And the last thing, which I'll just kind of use as a transition into the next conversation topic, so governance to me, with agentic specifically, has the fundamentals that you'd kind of described, right? Just in general, there needs to be data governance in place because you need the data to be managed, owned. You need kind of an understanding of the processes, the data catalogs behind it, so you can contextualize the data, so it can have use with purpose. But it takes on new lenses with agentic that we haven't, I don't want to say explored, but we haven't really matured or across all organizations. One nice example is with model context protocol and the use of tooling. You open up the ability to use tools, which are really just functions in many cases, articulated using natural language descriptors that the agent can pick up based on instructions to solve a problem or to have an automation workflow. And so behind that requires expansive governance that historically we're just not used to doing. I asked a data manager that's a friend of mine that actually sits on one of the councils, why in that industry, it was energy, are you guys so behind in some of your fundamental governance aspect? And it's just it takes a lot of time. Which, by the way, separate podcast, AI can help in establishing and curating governance in many shapes and forms also. So you need a new lens for governance, but you can actually help curate more mature governance using AI. And so we kind of talked about the high level conversation topics. I wanted to take a little bit of a dive into one technology topic that is of interest to me, that I know you have expansive experience with, because I've heard it, verbatim from you and from the work that you've done, and that's embeddings and semantic foundations. And so this is kind of connected to one of the fundamental success pillars for agentic, which is knowledge architecture. And how do I bring my organizational data or somebody's organizational data that I'm interested in, not just from the world model, that is the large language model, but from organizational process assets, documentations, or otherwise, into the interpretation of the large language model successfully at scale over huge amounts of data where there may be similarities in the data. And so I'll lead with that. I have some thoughts, but I'll lead with maybe sharing, what are the success necessities for a solid knowledge architecture that our audience should hear, whether they're technical or not, they should be aware of this.
Sure. I think, you are alluding to the embedding and semantic foundation. I think that's going to be basis for what we need to do. For the agentic AI to move beyond simple automation into autonomous reasoning, it requires quite a bit of a robustic semantic foundation. And the semantic foundation acts as the mental model of the world, if you would. There are three things that we need. One is the knowledge about everything that we do. I'm talking about we as a human being. Second one, what we need is the context or the memory that we need to execute things or do things, and also the logic that we need. We need to bring them all together. That's where the semantic foundation helps us to do that. And with the semantic foundation, it allows the agents really understand not just what data is, but also why it matters and how it relates to the business function. That's what the semantic foundation that brings in. In my mind, there are two core pillars for the semantic foundation. The first one is the embedding. You mentioned about embedding. This is basically a mathematical representation of the knowledge, and the semantic layer that is a conceptual framework that we have. These are the two core pillars. Maybe we can unpack those pillars one by one. And the vector embedding is almost like our neural memory. Embedding actually translate the unstructured data or structured data into high dimensional vectors, and to make it to be efficient for us to keep it and also search for that. And that'll be the primary mechanism for more of a long-term memory that we can keep as we make the progress on. And all of us remember RAG, retrieval augmented generation. We talked about contextual RAG, and where we can embedding promote the semantic search rather than a keyword search, so that we can bring in all relevant information, matching the right words if we would. For example, revenue dip and the sales decline, typically the same. So that could be semantically similar. So we can get those relevant information together and feed that into the large language model to get the right results that we need to have, or right decision that we can get, or right output that we can get. So that is the vector embedding. Think of that as our neural memory, that we have populated that memory. We can recall that, we can retrieve that in a semantic way. Then it comes to a semantic layer. Semantic layer is more like the business brain, and that provides the rigid logic and the ground truth that agent can use to bring a reliable results. And typically it is implemented by our knowledge graphs or ontologies. So they give the relationship, not just the facts alone, it provides the relationship as well. And that brings that to be very helpful for grounding and factuality. All of us talk about, hey, it could hallucinate, LLM could hallucinate, and the agents could hallucinate. And semantic foundation grounds that agent with verifiable facts. Take an example, your product A is incompatible with regions B. And how do we do that before we can execute the order and ship the product? And that could be an agent that checks those facts and stop that, so that we can avoid a costly mistakes. So these are the two core pillars. There are a few key aspects that comes to my mind when it comes to a semantic foundation. There are four of them. Let's quickly go through them. First is a semantic memory. This is the persistence of our facts and knowledge for the company, for specific domain. We can keep them in. I call that as a what is true, the facts that are stored there. Then episodic memory, which is basically historic interaction that we can store. That means what has happened in the past and what was the results that will help us for the future. Thus, more of an experience that we are recording along the way. The third one is the grounding. Grounding is ensure the agent's plan aligns with the real world constraints that our business has. And the fourth one is orchestration. This is basically routing the task to the most semantic fit specialized agent. We'll talk about that. It's going to be the mixture of experts and going to be a mixture of agents that we can have, and a team of agents that we're talking about specialized in different areas. Which agent should be solving a specific problem, that routing happens there as well. We call it as an orchestration. These are the key facts when it comes to semantic foundation. And all of us, we may be wondering why it really matters, and what is the key value of a semantic foundation. Well, I think without a strong semantic foundation, agentic systems can suffer from context drift. Why this happens is then as the task length grows, the agent could lose the thread of the original goal or a constraint or a specific instruction it is given to them. So it's really important that we avoid the contextual drift that can be avoided using the semantic foundation. Let me pause here. I know, Konrad, back to you. I'm sure you have things to add.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I want, so this was great as a foundational message to our audience. For those, and I guess I see this maybe two types of audience buckets: operational people that are looking to use the technology, and then technologists that are maybe looking to support the implementation of the technology for their organizations. And I think the message that collectively we have is one, like if you look at what you just described, the embeddings and the semantic foundations, if you unpack that a little, you realize, well, there are actually embeddings that are trained on different knowledge corpus. And so they're better tuned for engineering, language versus non-engineering language. So the vectors that are represented when you embed are optimized to retrieve semantic similarity of particular types of information. There's vector dimensionality, which is also plays into the, like, if there are information sources that are very similar but yet discrete, you have to consider dimensionality of the vectors potentially if you're really looking into it. Now, this is my second point. The enterprise application stacks are building up tools to make this easier. Inevitably, they are lagging the state of the art. And they're also, to some extent, they're intended to be kind of catch-alls. So you get a knowledge architecture that has abstracted all these levers, which are the optimal ways in which you should be handling your knowledge embeddings, so that it makes it easier for the user to stand up an agentic agent with the right type of knowledge repositories embeddings. But that then becomes a complex balancing act. And so I guess the point is, if you're a technologist, there's a lot there to unpack and to be at least aware of, because you're going to be trialing this agentic technology and you will be potentially coming up on places where it's not accurate, it's not precise, it's drifting from the context window. There's also, you mentioned semantic memory, and what was the second term you used? Episodic memory, which is like short-term, long-term memory. And so you need to decide, and maybe the enterprise architecture will for you, what do you use for your knowledge repositories? What do you use for your knowledge architectures? There's pivots even in existing enterprise architecture stacks, depending on the variables of your organization and the solutions you're trying to build. So if you're a technologist, there's a lot there. If you're in operations, you're trying to get outcomes. The outcomes may mean I have this type of organizational data. I need to make use of it to get this type of workflow to automate. And so bear in mind that to be successful, you have to consider this at some level and be aware of it so that it can be appropriately implemented with purpose for the organization that is implementing it. So that being said, let's take a step back. We got in the weeds a little bit on embeddings. And I want to talk at an organizational program level. We've talked a lot about the tech aspects of success, and this technology being exceptionally disruptive, both because it changes the way we do things, but it also brings a tremendous amount of value. Being very fast moving and evolving, it creates challenges that an organization has to address. I mentioned some of these to you in conversation, just kind of for the purpose of what are we going to talk about here at the program level. One of them to me is just strategic roadmaps for the tech, right? Like there are, if you look at the foundational ways to approach emerging technology or technology adoption, you kind of have different lenses in which you can look at it. Strategic roadmaps, talent acquisition, change management, things like that. Data governance, which we covered. But for me, AI and agentic AI has very unique, very different things that are being brought forward. Don't allow you to just template over everything you've done with any other technology. Talent, we talked about that, like unique skill sets are required here. Strategic roadmaps, do you have organizational process assets that will help you along repeating agentic success? No, right? Like there's ways in which you need to evolve this that maybe are completely outside of the comfort zone of your organization. And so I know you again have worked in this space, established extensive data fabrics and agentic program level constructs. So I wanted you to kind of open that to the audience here. Tell us a little bit more outside of the technology. What do we need to be looking at? Whether it's appropriately mapping the value case, appropriately strategizing and working with the business. What are the lenses in which organizations need to be looking at this beyond just the technology?
Sure. It's not just the technology, not just the use case. We want to look at that as a program level. I'll look at it at the enterprise level. I'll look at the corporate level. That's what everybody's interested in. And we talk about that at a use case level, but when we look at that from the program level, it may not be just adding that up. Let's figure out why that is not happening. I was thinking about that, Konrad. What is the difference between looking at the success at the use case level and to the program level? And this is part of the things, if you look at that, why some of the POCs fail. This is one of the root causes for that. We don't look at that from the beginning at the program level. And the difference in my mind, it may not be a great analogy. It's the difference in my mind is more like running a laboratory versus running a factory. And looking at the use case level and pure technology focus or technology lens is more like running a laboratory. But we need to look at that as being how we can run a factory. So that is the big difference in my mind. At the enterprise level, you're not just looking at the single model accuracy or a single platform efficiency. You are looking for portfolio as a velocity and resource efficiency that you can bring them in, and the risk aggregation that you can look at that as together. So in other words, velocity, efficiency, and risk, those are the three things that you can look at that. And that needs to be looked at the portfolio level. Maybe we can look at it one by one. When it comes to a velocity, instead of looking at the ROI on one tool, we previously talked about that. Sometimes could be myopic, looking at one ROI on one tool. And when you expand that to the whole organization, the whole enterprise, the cost could be very different, or the velocity could be very different. So it is important that we need to look at that as a whole. And we need to look at that as a weighted value of the portfolio rather than just simple aggregation before we can bring them together. And that's because different use cases can bring in different values that we need to be weighted them. So I look at that being more like a AI opportunity density. What use cases can accelerate and bring in velocity that we need within the portfolio that we have, and time to velocity. It's one thing is to talk about that now. The speed of AI, we need to have the velocity so that you'll be able to show the value there. And also compound efficiency gain. The reason why I'm bringing that up is like resource usage could be the same. I subscribe to the tokens, and that can be used across multiple use cases. The decision that you're making, scoring that you're doing could be across many different use cases. You can bring that as a efficiency across many different use cases as in a compounding way. And efficiency, that how do we measure that efficiency in terms of usage, how we can measure the efficiency of infrastructure utilization across multiple use cases, those needs to bring them in for the resource efficiency. And the risk aggregation, suppose you have one use case or one model that is having say 0.0001 bias, which may be manageable within the constraint of what we have. Now think about that. We have 100 models with the same bias. It creates a systemic liability right now. So it is important with both positive and negative aspect of it. When you look at the program, it gives you a better picture of what we have. And also looking at the program level allows us to create success matrices or success metrics that is helpful for the organization at the organization level. It could be accuracy, it could be speed, it could be revenue, it could be override rate, it could be coverage. That kind of the things that you can measure that makes a difference in our business rather than just sentiment of how well we are doing in AI. So that gives us an opportunity at the program level, at the enterprise level. Well, with all those things that we are talking about, the good news is there are some good practical implementation that we can look at. One thing that comes to my mind is the companies are adopting now AI command center. The AI command center is nothing but the AI control plane that brings in various metrics together so the executives and everybody in the company can look at that. And here is how we are making progress with. It could be a heat map of AI creating values across different teams, a different organization. It could be a red, yellow, green trust score for every department or every AI initiative. Or it could be a human in the loop ratio. What we mean by that is how much of a human intervention that we need that to make that they make the decision or that request in that portfolio. As this ratio improves or as this ratio drops, our program maturity increases. So those are the kind of things that we can practically implement to monitor them. Let me pause here.
Right. So I want to share something and get your opinion. This wouldn't be an AI Applied Consortium podcast if we didn't stray off the road a little bit, but this is the only bucket of topical information that I could think of that would fit this. I'll start with a very truthful compliment for you. So when we did our symposium at Visa last year, you shared, I'm not sure during the session or just over dinner, kind of your mantra for empowering your teams with the necessary capabilities and approach at a program level to be successful with agentic AI. And it really resonated with me. And it was grounded to me beyond the technology aspect of it in fundamental direction in terms of the skill sets of the future that are necessary to be successful in a world of AI and automation, which was the ability to problem solve and create and be resilient, right? Resilience in the form of continuously following the innovation velocity and problem solving, creative thinking, or creative to be able to create with the tools that are at your disposal. So I always use that as a gold standard. And I said that sometimes in compliment to you just in conversation, and sometimes as criticism to others because they were not following the gold standard. And when I think of programs, one of the things that I have seen and maybe detrimental to the success of Agentic is that different executives have built up pre-AI programs, pre-AI IT stacks over the course of the last 15 years that are their gold standards for what they've done in their past, but they do not align well with the future of where this technology is going. And so they are, for better or for worse, protective of the status quo and not disruptive in their frame of thought. And so a controversial way of saying this is that some people that might be appointed to, I came across why do we need a chief AI officer if we have a chief innovation officer? And of course, chief innovation officers in top tier organizations have very diverse skill sets and very open-minded emerging technologies approaches. Some don't. And I use the analogy, well, do you really want Blockbuster running your streaming strategy? And so
No.
These are, in my opinion, in some circles, very relevant barriers that essentially bottle up into, we're not going to do this. And by the time someone comes around, you're the North Dakota Blockbuster store and you're about to close. So I wanted to get your thoughts before we transition, because this is the only bucket I could think of mentioning this point.
Sure. I think there are three things that comes to my mind, Konrad, when we talk about that. One is the educate. We need to educate the team on what is possible, what's out there. Second one is enabling them. When it comes to the technology, as you know, this is changing so much every day. So it's very difficult for anybody to keep up to that. So we need to curate that and provide that. So that's kind of an educate part of it. And also enabling, making those technologies available. One thing is to take it as a learning. The other thing is to doing that to hands-on. And then third one is enable them in all the things that they could do and connect them with how they can map that to the company success or corporate success and initiative success, how it maps to the portfolio. So that combination helps people to be useful and also educate themselves and have confidence in building and delivering them. And also, when it comes to agentic application, maybe we can talk about that. There are two approaches people are taking today. I think what you're talking about, some of the things that you are seeing and you are pointing out, which is kind of hey, we are bringing in AI and along with the organization. This is almost like add on to the streaming. These are the capabilities that we can bring them in rather than building that from the scratch, which is kind of a AI native application for agentic AI. So maybe we can talk about the difference, how we see that being an AI adaptation to AI native, where we need to get to. Is that what you wanted to talk about that little bit, Konrad?
Yeah, let's talk about that, and then I think we're going to skip to the last topic after that, because we're going to be coming right at the end, and I want to get you a chance to speak about some of your cream of the crop, commerce-specific discussion around agentic. So let's talk a little bit about AI native and AI infused agentic. So the idea would be, there is existing workflows in which you can use AI to augment decisions or automate some of the process flows. And there is new workflows, new processes that can be completely native, grounded in capabilities of AI that historically were never possible. And so I wanted you to get a chance to maybe share a little bit about that and talk us through, in my opinion, AI native is the high impactful future state that we want to get to. Not all of the current capabilities and workflows allow us to do that. So maybe you can just share a little bit more about your experience there.
Sure. I think you coined the term AI infused versus AI native. applications for agentic AI.
I coined it. Okay, I take the credit.
I heard that from you.
Okay.
And in my mind, the distinction between AI infused and AI native is almost like, well, I need to go from point A to point B. I have a bicycle, but I need to go faster. I need to go quicker. I need to put less energy into it so I can be efficient. How do I do that? I have two options. One is that I can add on a motor to the bicycle, maybe electric motor. And the other would be, hey, let me build an autonomous electric vehicle from ground up, which will be able to drive itself from point A to point B.
I love that you say this because this is the foundation for first principle thinking. And I think the example that is given when we talk about first principle design and thinking, breaking down just because you rode a bike doesn't mean that's the best way to get from point A to point B.
Yeah,
so I love that as a getting out of the gate for this discussion.
And in the agentic AI context, it's about how much of an autonomy a system can truly handle. That's where the question is. And with a bicycle adding a motor, it's not going to be able to handle a lot of autonomy. If my goal is to agentic AI, remember between the four A's, one of them is autonomous. If you wanted to have that, we may have to go to the first principles and think about our workflows and think about what we need to do. But let's look at the kind of how do we look at the different AI infused application versus an AI native application, characteristics of that. And AI infused application, with the bicycle analogy, I call this as a bolt-on approach. You can bolt on AI capabilities to the existing workflows and existing process that you have. And now at best what we can do is AI will be treated as a co-pilot or a specialized feature within the legacy architecture that you have. What is our legacy architecture? Here is procedural deterministic. It's all based on a flow chart that you had and the logic that you had. That's what we have implemented. We'll continue to keep that. What an agent can do, it can act like a task-specific assistant, not anything more than that. The limitation here is this is bounded by the original user interface that you had, and database schema that we had, and the workflow that we had. All the things are limited by this. But if you want to think about that as an AI native application, I call that as an agent-first approach. And that can build with the assumption that the large language model, the LLM, or the agentic control, or the agentic controller is the central processing unit, CPU for our application, not just an add-on. And this architecture could be declarative and dynamic. This is not with the rigid workflow or a flow chart that we had. It more of an intent and the goal. Now you may be asking the question, Konrad, what happened to the code? The code is often a set of constraints or tools that the agent orchestrated real time. Not necessarily now we have to build that ahead of time in an exhaustive manner. And the role of the agent here could be autonomous operator. It can handle end to end. It can reason through the implication, execute series of multiple steps. Think about that immediate human, not necessarily waiting for every step for a human prompt. The advantage is a lot of good advantages. When we have time, we can go through the details of it. The top thing that comes to my mind is the system could become a self-healing. If the API fails, it will retry with a different system, different tools to get you an example of, get you the results that you have been looking for. So these are the things that you can come with the AI native applications.
That's great, Sam. Thank you for that. So I want to get into a final topic before we start concluding the discussion, and that's around agentic commerce and the frictionless economy. So part of what we've been talking about is the automation capabilities of agentic AI and the ability of it to automate different types of workflows, but in part, various non-productive, non-value-driven workflows to eliminate noise, which is also separate podcast, how you can eliminate or improve signal to noise ratios amongst your individual work stream by using agentic AI. But in that light, where agentic AI or what agentic AI is empowering is the ability to remove friction within transactions, within any effort that somebody is trying to perform. In this case, Today, it's mostly online, but I envision this bridge between the cyber and the physical world slowly breaking with autonomous robots and everything, and that becomes then a much more pervasive use of agentic AI for frictionless support and frictionless economy. So, coming from a very large financial institution, working with this technology with purpose around agentic commerce and having extensive historical experience in the financial service space, I think it's no one better that I could think of that can have this discussion with our audience and share a little bit more about agentic commerce and the frictionless economy. So can you share with us, what this really means, how it will change us and affect us as individuals as this technology becomes more pervasive?
Sure, happy to do that, Konrad. I think the history of commerce is a continuous effort to reduce friction. And we moved from thousands of years ago, the bartering system, we exchange goods. Then we exchange goods to precious metals, to standardized coinage, to the digital network, and then e-commerce, and now mobile commerce. If you think about that, every time you are removing a friction in that commerce process, whether it's a payment or you kind finding it. If you think about that, from e-commerce to mobile commerce, you remove the friction of you need to have the access to physical privileges or physical card, or you need to be physically there in that place to conduct a commerce. You remove that friction. And also from if you think about that's a regular commerce to e-commerce, the whole world is in your fingertip that you can make that commerce happen. So those are different frictions that we have removed along the way. And agentic commerce represent the next phase of evolution, where autonomous AI agents negotiate, transact on behalf of the user to eliminate transaction friction. It is prime right now. You can create your own agent with a credential from that you are using, and you can delegate that. You can give that credential to the agent to act on your behalf, whether it is negotiating or transacting. And now you wonder what's going to happen here. You would see a lot of the buying and research agents that you can employ. And some of us enjoy making shopping and some of us don't. And all of us needs to buy things. This is where the agent comes in. You can delegate those tasks to them. And this is an emerging of e-commerce buying and research agents are accelerating right now. And one of the things that people typically concern about it, did I get the best price? Did I get it from the best place that I could find? Did I get all the warranties that we need and all this kind of stuff? Now you can delegate that to your buying agent. It'll go around and do that. And same thing, you should expect a selling agent as well from the merchant side, who will be able to negotiate with the buying agent to make all these things happen. We are all familiar with the funnel when it comes to the commerce. And the traditional human-driven funnel is being replaced by the autonomous agent funnel. This is basically a multi-site scanning. The buying agent will scan, and dynamic preference matching. The buying agent will match that with the selling agent. Eventually, one-click execution, either by the human or by the agent, depends on what is the level of authenticity delegation that we have given. And what is the benefit for the consumer here? The consumer benefit is personalization. And it's almost like I can express all my desires and all my preferences, all my needs to my digital twin. The agent is going to act like my digital twin to show their preferences. One the difference is that it'll do work 24/7, look at the scan the whole world to find the best option that I need. Things like this. That's a shopping assistant that we'll have. And this is then take an example of a travel. A travel streamlines complex multi-vendor travel booking by proactively rebooking delayed flights. Wouldn't that be nice? That the flight is getting delayed, you want to rebook that. You don't have to call the agent, or you don't have to get online to do that yourself. That will do that all by itself if you have the agent that's coming up. And also the big thing is like multi-currency settlement and preferred credential that you want to use. All things can be done either by instruction provided previously or with the best option that you can bring them in. And last, I would say, is the transaction automation. And these technologies are driving a frictionless economy and to the next level, where agents can negotiate, execute transaction with a minimal human involvement with efficiency. Efficiency in terms of cost, preference in terms of what is the loyalty that I wanted to be using that, and keeping track of all my purchases and warranties and instruction manuals, and all those things can be done by the agent to make that to be frictionless for me as a buying experience. I'm sure the same thing is true for the merchant for the selling experience, because it is being handled by the agents.
So as we kind of conclude this, Sam, you and I, with some of the other trustee members of the consortium, we are looking to build deeper dive learning tracks for the industry across the technology and the business lenses in which organizations need to look at, plan for, and implement to be able to be successful with large language model technology, agentic, and AI in general. This was in part intended to convey 10,000-foot view to an audience of different levels of interest, but it's also a foundation for us where we can take deep dives into all these topical areas in the future that we have collectively a lot of great mindshare around. So I look forward to doing that. We've done that, tested this already in a few locations across North America, and we're continuing to do that. So I look forward to doing that with you and the other trustees as we progress. So Sam, appreciate your time. For those of you listening, we will have a follow-up podcast in the next few weeks with another senior member of the technology space looking to share other insights for you. So thank you again. And Sam, I'll give you the last word. One takeaway for the audience that you want them to have from our discussion, what would it be?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Konrad, for the opportunity. As always, it's a joy talking to you, and looking forward to interact with our audience in various forms where we can learn together. I always learn when we interact with our members and also with our group. The takeaway with this AI transformation is critical, and it starts with the data, then also building up the muscles that we need to have. And let's work together, and we can create the future. And we are here to share knowledge and learn from and educate each other so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can leapfrog with the AI as a capability. Thank you, Konrad.
Thank you.